Now, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Musts. For this month, we will be discussing the top three challenges of the youth, and we're very, very happy to have with us this afternoon the head of community of Rappler and the head of digital communication of MovePH, and he is no other than Mr. Jules Guiang. Good
Hi,
afternoon, Jules.
Lawrence. Good afternoon to you and to all our viewers. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Likewise, we're very happy and we're very privileged to have you this afternoon. Now, Jules, given that we only have 15 minutes for the segment, and I know that the topic is relatively wide, relatively large, no, in terms of all of the things that we can discuss this afternoon, I'll go straight to the first question. Jules, what do you think are the three most pressing challenges that our youth are facing right now?
Yeah, it's hard to consolidate, no? Kasi as you said nga, there are a lot of issues. But from my end, in my own perspective, I think number one, foremost is disinformation. That's number one.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, as a consequence na rin ng disinformation, probably the curtailing of freedom of expression of some of our youth members. And lastly, in relation to the pandemic, number three, that would be what would be the effect of the 2 years of remote learning on the quality of our graduates and how it affects their learning basically. And yeah, basically that one. Maybe we could expound further.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jules. No, so just for me to recap, no, disinformation, curtailing of freedoms, no, and the impact and effect of 2 years of remote learning to our youth. So perhaps we can have time for you to expound on these items, no. Siguro for a few minutes, no.
Sure.
What would be the specific pain points, no, that our youth are experiencing when it comes to disinformation up to the 2 years of remote learning, as we've mentioned?
Yeah, for one with this information, data tells us per Kepios and We Are Social, they release a digital report year per year, and they released
Mm-hmm.
one for January. Comparing to the election season in 2016 and 2022, there's really an increase of usage of social media every election year. So um, I, I don't have the numbers right now, but I could share with you offline maybe. But we have a lot of people using social media. So basically, that's a huge market and audience for victims of disinformation, basically. So what is disinformation? Disinformation has an explicit intent to mislead people. And why do people create disinformation in the first place? Because they have their own agenda. It's a long list of agenda for sure, but the main challenge here is how can the youth counter this information? Because in reality, sadly, we don't have a shared reality anymore. Unlike before, the gatekeepers of information usually are the journalists. Because the journalists have their own have their own editorial processes or vetting processes. But right now, our gatekeeper mainly is the algorithm on social media. But sadly, algorithm currently doesn't have the capacity to know which is right from wrong. So basically, if you like a page, or if you follow a page, or if you join a group, or your interests, those are the kind of content that you will receive in your own timeline. So speaking of algorithm, we have our own different interests, right? So that primarily is the root why we don't have a shared reality of truth anymore. So that's number one with this information. With the curtailing of freedom of expression, Lawrence, I think this is somehow a consequence also of this information. Because, for example, we have usually when you are young, right, you're very energetic, you're very vocal about things, etc. And if your opinion on a specific matter probably doesn't go with the flow with the majority, right? You could be easily tagged as an enemy of the state or as a terrorist, diba? Ganun nakadelikado ngayon. So that's one of the challenges that probably our youth members are facing right now. And lastly, on the 2 years of remote learning, it started 2020. I was able to kind of experience it in my last semester in my graduate school, and it was really difficult. So what more for those who experience remote learning for 2 straight years, especially for those students who are in courses that needed to have face-to-face interaction. So that's the challenge that our youth are facing right now, and a challenge also the employers.
Thank you, Jules, no? Medyo nakakatakot nga if you're going to think at it, no? If you're perhaps a fresh graduate, no? Or someone who's about to enter the workforce, and
Yes.
we hear about these challenges, no? About these problems. So since we're talking about these problems, no? And a good percentage of our workforce being an emerging economy, the Philippines, no? Is the youth. And so from your perspective, no, what do you think are some actions that they can do to address these challenges as a sector, no, as the active players to ensure that these challenges are being resolved, no, by themselves, no? Later on, punta tayo sa other players, no, to help them address these challenges. But for them as a sector.
Well, from the sector itself, no, of course, we can only do so much, diba? We can do something, but we can, it's very limited. But we start from ourselves, diba? Dun muna eh. How can we counter disinformation from our own level? Do we share content just because the graphic or the content or the caption is catchy? Or, diba? Usually, kung ano yung enticing, yun yung isi-share mo agad eh. So you start with yourself. Try to click the article first, read it through. Does the content come from a reliable, credible media organization, or is it from a new organization with no track record yet and probably a source of this information for the past year? So you need to have that kind of vetting from your level first, and then after that, try to go out from your bubble and try to reach out to your immediate circle. Start doing it with your family and then your friends, because I think especially for the youth, no, and our youth leaders, usually we tend to be very active within our own circles, but when it comes to family, yun na pag-iiwanan minsan, 'di ba? Yung mga advocacies natin, we don't usually talk about it on the table when we are with our families. So yun siguro, we start on that immediate circle first, and then try to ripple out lang din. Try to create your own KPIs on how you can try to address this information from your own level. On curtailing freedom of expression, this is a long struggle, and I think every generation has experienced this kind of challenge, no? It siguro it changes lang on the approach of each generation, but I think right now it's really more on trying to push back in a way na you're not condescending. Kasi sometimes when we tend to be very passionate on what we believe in, there's a tendency that we might be a bit condescending kasi nga we know so much about this particular advocacy. So let's try to start from scratch and try to understand that not everyone knows about the advocacy you are fighting for. So try to go back to the basics and engage with them by engaging and not really educating. Yun yung isang thing na natutunan ko for the past years in terms of terminologies, it's very important na you're engaging not really to educate, because if you say and go on stage or go to a person and say I'm here to educate you, it's a bit condescending already, kasi there's an apparent assumption that you're that person or those groups know less than you. So try to change that kind of mindset. On the 2 years of remote learning because of the pandemic, I understand, I think a month ago, there's this professor from UP Diliman who commented about the surge of the numbers of summa cum laudes and magna cum laudes. So parang they were saying na baka naging very lenient among others, but it's a very systemic problem of the institution. But I think it's also a challenge to the students then. Of course, definitely they really worked hard for that, kasi that's still Latin honors, and even for those who did receive Latin honors, no. But I think it's more on exerting extra effort to learn more about the jobs that they are trying to apply in, or whether you're in work already. Kasi ako, when I started working in 2012 naman, I thought I was really confident with my degree, etc. Pero when you're when you're starting already in your work, talagang start from scratch eh. So you need that kind of being grounded, of humility to really learn or even relearn everything.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks, Jules. No, and you made a very good point there in terms of the challenges. No, na some of them are indeed cyclical, no, in nature, and hindi siya necessarily unique to the youth of today. No, such as yun nga, how do we approach the challenge of being curtailed in our freedom of expression, but the others medyo may mga idiosyncrasies that are occurring now because of the digital age, such as disinformation, and then of course the what happened in the last 2 years during the pandemic, and why we moved to 2 years of remote learning, and ano yung naging impact sa atin. So thank you for sharing those items, Jules. And perhaps, and I've been mentioning the youth, but I'm pretty sure the two of us we're still members of the youth sector, in terms of being young professionals, and being able to really make an impact, to help yung kapwa nating members of the youth sector, in combating and in ensuring that these challenges are being resolved. Now let's also go, Jules, to the other members, or the other parts of the community of the society, and given that a good majority of our listeners and viewers are mostly people managers, and would come from different generations.
Yeah.
What are some of the concrete items naman, that they can do at the workplace, very specific to the workplace, to alleviate some of these youth challenges that we've been talking about?
Yeah, just to chime in, Lawrence, unfortunately, I'm no longer part of the youth sector.
Okay, okay.
At least following our laws in the Philippines. Kasi
So baka ako rin pala.
I'm
Okay, okay.
31, but in UN we're still youth kasi until
Yeah, I was
35.
referring to the UN. I think
Yeah,
30, mid-30s,
35.
no?
Yeah, until
Okay.
35. Yeah, anyway, for our young managers, who are listening right now. I'm also a young manager right now, and it's somehow a struggle as well for me kasi there's a need for the agility in the workplace, 'di ba? Every day different issues, especially from my industry right now in the media sector. It's really difficult kasi every day you are encountering different unique issues day per day. But I think number one, internally, if you're managing a team, it's really more on knowing the interests of your teammates kasi you have them you have the millennials and the Gen Zs working together already. And of course, you still have the older generations as our supervisors and those people who we get our wisdom from, right? So it's really more ako, I'm really impressed with how Gen Zs are working right now with their strengths, their agility. They're really fast, very tech savvy. So I think instead of maybe treating them as a threat, to the older generations, it's more on providing them spaces on how we can tap on those strengths of the Gen Zs para mas maging they see how they can contribute to the organization. Kasi siguro going back then when we were still younger in our workplaces, 'di ba? Parang there's a desire to really prove yourself immediately. But parang eventually you will learn na there are so much things to experience and to learn then. So it really takes humility. So you don't need to slap them naman on the face na be humble, 'di ba? But I think it's a skill of a manager on how we can package things, to make them understand na don't be on a hurry, 'di ba? Parang we're here naman to learn together and to appreciate the strengths of each generation. So yeah, that's number one. Number two, siguro trying to weave in na rin yung mga issues that I mentioned earlier on disinformation, kasi this issue on disinformation isn't just an issue of the youth, it's an issue of all generations. So I guess in a workplace, probably this is with the HR department and with the bosses na rin. How can we address this issue? Should there be policies? Should there be trainings on, to introduce, to orient the whole workforce what this information is, and probably how this information can actually impact the organization? Kasi it can, in any way, it can. So probably having a baseline on that would be very important. Number two, on the 2 years of remote learning, I think this is with the HR again and with the bosses, exposing them to more, again, trainings and capacity building din. Kasi iba yung experience mo when you're studying in school, whether that's physical or remote, and once you are applying everything that you've learned or you have not learned yet, diba? So I think it's really the HR's role is very crucial right now in transition to those fresh graduates coming from remote learning.
Mhm. All right. Thank you so much, Jules. No, and the insights were very much appreciated, and I think we were able to cover a lot of ground in the last 15 minutes. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, too.
All right. So this has been Musts for People Manager on Cam. We just had the head of community of Rappler and the head of digital communications of MovePH, Mr. Jules Guiang.
Thank you
Back to
so
you
much.
now, Joanne.